Now, one disturbing trend of the COVID-19 pandemic has been the growing focus on super spreader events. Festivals, weddings and funerals are some examples of events that could turn into super spreaders. But the Southern African Communications Industries Association is arguing that big events being considered as super spreader events is incorrect. And to explain this to us a little bit better is Sharif Baker of the Southern African Communication Industries. Thank you for joining us this evening, Sharif. And I'm very puzzled by this notion that you say that big events such as weddings and rages are not super spreader events, when we've seen the Ballito rage and the Plettenberg rage having to be cancelled specifically because there was a high number of COVID cases that were found at both events.
Good evening, Rofhiwa, and good evening to the viewers. So let's go straight to that. Both the Rage Festival and the Plet Festival followed COVID protocols explicitly, especially riding on the back to the challenges that we went through last year this time. Bearing in mind, last year this time, there was no such thing as a vaccine. Now, both Rage and Plet festivals put in stringent protocols by virtue of anybody attending or wanting to attend their festival had to have a vaccine certificate and verify it before entrance. Or at the worst case, have a PCR test made available for verification. Now, the positive cases that were found at the Ballito Rage Festival happened prior to even entrance. And these PCR tests were issued 72 hours prior to them leaving Gauteng. So the question asks, where did they get infected from the time the PCR test came to the rapid test that took place at the Rage Festival? Was it on an aircraft? Was it in a bus? Was it in an e-hailing cab? Was it at a hotel? So you cannot blame the festival that has put stringent protocols into place. And unfortunately, due to public demand and pressure, not knowing or understanding the protocols that have been put into place, they have opted to cancel the event rather than push forward and fight the ever-growing propaganda that is currently existing throughout South Africa, that festivals and live events that follow stringent protocols as of National JOC and the Sacia Act as dictated by the Department of Sport and Arts and Culture. So it's become, the knock-on is horrific because, as we heard now from Minister Sisulu, tourism and the creative industry are hand in hand at the impact that this has happened of the international trade for business events and conferences and exhibitions, but also for live events here locally because of fear-mongering that's now taking place, that there is a possible chance that they are catalysts and or super spreaders, which is just not true, Rofhiwa.
Right, it may not be true, Sharif, and I hear the argument that you're bringing forth. But data and research is coming in on a daily around this new variant, for example, Omicron, and the fact that it's got reinfection issues where even if you are vaccinated, you are having the risk of being reinfected. And the reality of the matter is, for these particular events, I'm not going to talk about weddings or funerals because they don't have the same age group that we see at these rages. A lot of young people, and I know you've mentioned the vaccinations, but it looks like it's becoming a lot easier for young people to get this particular strain of the virus. And the fact that they can be reinfected even though they've had COVID previously is particularly worrying. And then one more thing, Sharif, this particular strain spreading a lot faster than was ever anticipated. Surely that concerns you somewhat when it comes to considering events of this nature. You may not call them super spreader events, but there are some risks that still remain despite the protocols that you would have put in place.
Absolutely, and you are correct. Look, none of us still up until now understand Omicron. The scientists are still analyzing, testing, and doing stringent bits and pieces to analyze where and how. But the same could be said of entering an event because we don't understand Omicron. If I walk into a shopping mall and I touch a handrail, is it not the same thing? Bearing in mind, you can walk into a shopping mall without being tested, without having vaccination, without proving any form of vaccination. At least with live events, you know when you're entering it, you know you're entering it with the possibility of being safe, more probability rather than a possibility of being safe because of being vaccinated or having issued a PCR test or rapid antigen test. The one thing that we need to understand is, you know, this time last year or even 6 months ago, we didn't even anticipate Omicron. We didn't even anticipate it a month ago, and it is absolutely horrific for us and for the world. But we are fortunate that our scientists have brought a vaccination to us that is working. And God willing, it's keeping us out of hospital and it's keeping the fatality rate lower than it's ever been. And that's the positive we need to take out of this. That on the worst case scenario, if I am a youngster or a person attending some form of event or sporting event and I do contract the COVID Omicron, the worst that's going to happen is I'm going to catch a cold or I'm going to have the flu. But I am not going to go into hospital or have a fatality. And I say again, whether it be an event, which is far safer than walking into a shopping mall right now, Rofhiwa.
Right, and then just a final thought from you, Sharif. What is it that you would like to see happen from government stakeholders? You have mentioned that a lot of these organizers put in some really strict protocols to ensure a safe event for all who attend. But surely going forward, because COVID is here to stay, there's going to be stronger engagement, sustainable engagement between organizers and government stakeholders to ensure that the economy is not as impacted as it has been in this instant. We did speak to one of the chief executives, I think it was of the Plattenberg Bridge, who said that the event creates jobs for the community over the days that it takes place. So this constant cancelling is not a sustainable solution, but you guys are going to have to put your heads together as organizers and government to ensure that a sustainable solution is found.
Absolutely. The economic recovery of our country is at paramount importance to everybody, and thus we have sat around the table over the last couple of days with our social partners at NEDLAC and engaged on this exact matter on how we can mitigate any challenges, work with government so that the economic impact is not as harsh, because this country cannot see it, never mind our sector. Currently, to date, we have lost 65% of any form of business in the last 4 days. And that's just a snapshot survey. So we're looking at, over the next 2 months, at least it increasing up to 80% and equating that into a rand value both for, and I'm just talking about the creative cultural industry with business sector, I'm not even talking about tourism, is in the billions. So working closely with our social partners in NEDLAC, we have engaged with government where we are looking at how we can resolve via the regulations with the Disaster Management Act, making sure vaccines are at the forefront of whatever we need to do. So much so we've engaged with the Department of Sport and Arts and Culture, with Minister Nathi Mthethwa with regards to sporting events. And with great success at the Bafana Games hosted, where we had 2,000 spectators and the system worked flawlessly in controlling the ingress and egress of our spectators with safety and monitoring their with verification. So this system can be put into place. The National Department of Health has now recently updated their facilities so the EVDS system is operational, which can be scanned via a cell phone. So this can be put into place. Look, the reality is we're in the 4th wave. God forbid, there's probably going to be a 5th and a 6th wave. We now need to find solutions rather than worrying about fear-mongering and keeping our country shut, which is just not good for anybody.
Sharif Baker, thanks for your time this evening. He's from the Southern African Communications Industry Association, and he's the chairperson there, telling us that we need to stop the fear-mongering and saying that the big events that are hosted across the country at various times of the year are not necessarily super-spreader events. There needs to be greater engagement around how we create sustainable platforms and not just cancel things when we see different waves coming by.